welcome to the third episode of Marked Out Radio. I'm Sean.
And I'm Dana.
And we're here today to talk a little bit about a topic that is, I would say, highly controversial and a source of a lot of frustration for convention goers specifically. That is the topic of guest cancellations.
Yeah, I think as far as normal worst case scenarios when you're attending a convention, I would rank cancellations right on the top of the list.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've been doing cons since 07-ish, 06, 07 in that ballpark, and there's very few things as frustrating as a guest canceling. I mean, look, the most frustrating thing is you get there and the guest no shows, and it's actually really funny that con promoters definitely have different lingo for cancellations. There are some times where there's no advance notice of a cancellation. You get to a show and there's a little sign at the table or not that says so and so has canceled. Those are the worst kind of cancellations. And other times, they cancel weeks in advance. So I guess to launch the conversation about cancellations, have you ever? I know I've been stung by a couple of bad ones, but have you ever been stung by a cancellation or a no-show?
I mean, Randy Quaid is one that stung me a few times for sure.
I mean, I can't believe, to be honest, Randy Quaid is being booked regularly for shows now, given the incredible history. So, for those who are not aware, Randy Quaid no-showed several high-profile appearances. And Randy Quaid was known for being a sort of a difficult, high-maintenance guest to begin with, and they had booked a few of them. I mean, Steel City had booked him, Monster Mania had booked him, a bunch of them had, where they paid him money up front for a guarantee, and he no-showed, and it happened a handful of times. And I mean, I think Steel City was the big one where they promised up and down, no, this one for real, he's going to show, and he didn't. He no-showed again, and there was talk of him being basically blacklisted all over the con circuit. And then lo and behold, Quaid shows up. I think he ended up Steel City ended up being his first show. He incredibly was not blacklisted.
Yeah.
And now he regularly makes appearances. So, but yeah, we've all been stung by Randy Quaid. If you've attended shows specifically for him, in the early days, he canceled so many. I know I'm still sitting on a stack of Jennifer Grey items. Jennifer Grey's canceled multiple times on Steel City and possibly elsewhere. I don't even know, but supposedly. When is Steel City? Next week? The week after?
Steel City is going...
It's August.
I got it right here. August 9th through the 11th.
All right. So we'll see. She's booked again for that one. So we'll see. I'm not terribly optimistic. We're actually not attending that show, but I'm not terribly enthusiastic for her. But we'll see. Maybe I'll have to eat crow. And of course... yeah, go ahead.
I mean, Steel City, for whatever reason, and we can get into that later in the episode, but Steel City is just, as far as like getting out the basically doing the impossible, they are somehow the ones. They always manage to book the name that you never expect to ever do a convention, or to keep having faith and giving the person that cancels a million times another chance. Like,
I think it's large money up front.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a ton of mystery behind it. I think they're willing to pay up front where the a lot of the other cons simply won't. And then of course there's infamous Katie Seagal. It was a really interesting one. I had a whole bunch of...
She was blacklisted at several conventions, I know, after her string of cancellations.
Oh yeah, I mean, like an actual public blacklist.
Yeah,
she had no showed a string of conventions in a row. Or canceled at the last minute, and then she started making appearances, and now she's back in everyone's good graces. It was just really funny, and we would be remiss if we didn't talk about professional wrestler Sid Vicious / Sid Justice / Psycho Sid.
Yes,
that was one of your faves.
I have my own cancellation no-show story with Psycho Sid.
Wait, didn't you had a deal worked out for Sid, right?
I had a deal with our friend of the business, Tom Unger, with Big Event. The Big Event had Sid at one of the big events in Queens. I forget which one it was exactly, but I had a whole deal set up with Sid. I remember I was pulling prints out of different binders. I had bins upon bins of stuff. I get to the venue. I go upstairs, and Tom comes like running up to me, and he's like, Sid's not here. And Tom told me that he had his guy waiting in the airport, and Sid just didn't get on the plane. So of course Sid didn't get off the plane.
Yeah, that's what's so funny is that's not the first or even the fifth time that's happened. It's happened many times, and it's like Lucy with the football.
Yeah, that that that's the beauty of Sid. And speaking of Sid, we definitely have to give our props and kudos to Dylan Hines, Jack of Wrestling Universe, and Ken of KNS. They got him out. He was in New York. He did a great virtual on KNS WrestleFest Live on Facebook, where they had 8x10s and encyclopedias up to the rafters, and he was signing his fingers off. And then the next day, he went to the Wrestling Universe. Line looked to be down the block, and it appeared to be in good spirits.
You can that's one of the I think the most immensely frustrating things, and I know that I have friends and acquaintances who will go to cons once in a while, but are not really convention people, and for them, no shows and cancellations are the most frustrating thing because these cons just to talk about the structure of how these cons make money. So these cons make money in two ways. They make money by selling a space to vendors with vendor tables, but the bulk of their money comes from admission tickets. And so they actually most cons do not make any money off guest autographs or photo ops. That money goes to the guests, or that money goes to the photographer company. The idea is that they book high profile, high end guests that will draw fans to buy tickets to the show, and
Yeah.
the promoters will make money from the tickets to the show. So there's a lot of blame, and some of it just, some of it unjust. A lot of blame for a no show goes on the promoter because the promoter has sold tickets on the name value of a guest, and then when that guest cancels or no shows, the fan is still on the hook for the price of that ticket.
Yeah, it's all about the fine print. I'm sure every single person that attends a convention or a signing has had that one big cancellation where even though you know the answer, you want to look at the fine print. Is there any way that I can get my money back? I don't want to go to the show now because the main reason I was going is now gone. So
Yeah.
there is a very real, you would like to think that like convention promoters would never stoop to such levels, but there is a very real impact that if you have someone that sells tickets, even if they end up canceling, you're still making money. So it doesn't really hurt you that much.
We actually do have a real life story about that right after this quick break. So we'll do a little housekeeping here. Marked Out Radio is presented by Marked Out Collectibles. If you're shopping for autographs, check out www.markedoutcollectibles.com. You can check out our eBay store at marked-out-collectibles, or our sister eBay store at ny-collectibles. And of course, to contact us for any reason, please email markedoutcollectibles at gmail.com. All right, so let's get into what makes the con scene so cancelable, because I was talking to my brother about this. He started dabbling in cons in recent years, but doesn't really care too much about how they're run, and is by no means into the hobby in the way that I am. So he gets infuriated and freaks out whenever there's a cancellation. So how is it that cons are able to advertise all these names, and these names can seemingly cancel willy-nilly?
It all, how I've always look at it is when you have, it's all about the fine print. Card is subject to change. There was even a documentary about that in the pro wrestling world, and the same thing goes for the convention world. No convention promoter is ever staking their reputation on any one guest showing up. It's always subject to change. But I mean, to some degree, how much of that is abused? Like, is there should there be more protection on a convention attendee than just, oh, well, the fine print says this, you're out of luck?
So I mean, look, to be fair, a lot these days anyway, a lot of the current convention names are working actors. It's not like it was 20 years ago where it was all retired actors.
Yeah.
Now they're all working actors, and so there is an understanding that a working actor, if they're called to work for any reason other than cons, like for their day job, so if they're on television, they have to shoot, or if they have to do promotion for their day job, or if they're doing a commercial or whatever booking they have that's non-convention, that convention bookings go to the bottom of their priority list, that their day job always comes first. And so the first aspect of it is if someone is a working actor, then or a wrestler, then those bookings come first. So I know, for example, we had a wrestler booked I guess about a year ago, who then informed us that they actually got booked onto a pay-per-view show, and they had to pull out of the date that we had booked them for. And you can't even get mad about it, because the couple thousand that we would pay them pales in comparison to the payoff for a match on pay-per-view.
Of course, there's no way, as even though this is like our business and all the fans that come, these shows are big deals. You can't compare to that. And even going beyond that, like we've had a current TV talent, we've tried numerous times to get them booked for a con, and we've had handshake agreements that's always pending, that they're not needed at TV. And then when it comes closer, they always reach out and say, well, I'm needed at TV. And that's the way it goes. We never get mad. We always understand, because that's their day job. We can't expect them to tell the company they are on TV for, sorry, I have a vendor table with my name on it, and it's not going to work.
Yeah, and so I mean, and so I see, even though a lot of fans don't really, let's face it, this is the truth. If you're traveling a lot of hours for a con, and you paid your money, and you're paying travel, you're paying ticket costs, you're paying potentially a hotel. Sometimes people fly, and you get to a show, and the talent that you were there to see is canceled. I understand why it's pretty frustrating.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I think that it's really, really important to be communicative about when that your talent is canceled. And we've have knowledge of instances where talent has known they were canceling for a long time, and it was never revealed to fans, because sometimes certain promoters want to use as much of as much of that name recognition. They want to bleed out as much time as they can to sell additional tickets, even though that guest winds up having already been canceled.
Yeah.
So there's actually a pretty interesting one. I think enough time has passed that the parties involved. I mean, look, the party involved. One of the major parties involved is out of business, so screw them. It doesn't matter. But there's a really interesting story. This is it. I mean, I actually tried Googling before we got on here to find the year, and I couldn't even find the year. But it's over 10 years ago for sure.
Oh, for sure, definitely.
When Wizard World, I think it was Philadelphia, Wizard World Philadelphia, I think. Although it could have been that Wizard World New York show they ran for a few years. I don't remember. One of the Wizard shows. And I'm gonna come out and say it. I went to a lot of the Wizard shows. I gave them a lot of money over the years, but they sucked as a company. Their business practices were unethical, and frankly, I'm glad that they're not running cons anymore. But there was an interesting moment years back where they had publicly announced that one of their shows would be headlined by Willem Dafoe. Do you remember this?
I do.
Willem Dafoe, at the time, Spider-Man was red hot. That was when he was Green Goblin in Spider-Man. This is like not recent Spider-Man. This is like Spider-Man 2 Spider-Man. That's how long ago it was.
Yeah, Tobey Spider-Man.
Yeah. And he was kind of red hot. He had never done a con before. He was a big name, big deal. And he wasn't the only one they announced. They announced someone else too. Um, who's the guy? He was in that movie that was a huge flop. Taylor something.
Taylor Kitsch.
That's the name. That's the name. He was the one of the other ones who was booked. They were, I mean, obviously he's not a headliner on the level of a Willem Dafoe, but those two were booked as headliners for one of these Wizard shows. And I remember buying my tickets immediately. I really wanted to see Willem Dafoe. It was super cool. It was a very rare guest, had never done anything. I was really excited to meet him. And then out of the blue, Wizard just canceled him. And it's very odd. It's very unusual for a con to cancel its headliner like that. And so I started digging around, and I started emailing people, and I started, I tried a little bit of investigative journalism. I don't even know if I told you all of this stuff, like crazy stuff that I was doing. That I was emailing some of I knew some of the parties that were involved financially
No, I
in
don't think I
putting.
knew all this.
Yeah. So I figured out some of the parties. I had a conversation in person at a con with someone who's done a lot of booking. He used to do a lot of booking at Wizard, and now he's run his own cons, and he's not a great friend of yours anymore. So I'm not gonna mention his name, but I grabbed him at a con, and I was like, "Yo, what's up? Who is involved with this Willem Dafoe booking?" And he gave me the name of the parties who were financially involved. And so I started emailing around, just like, try and figure out what the heck was going on, because it was so odd for a headliner to be canceled like that. And they were pretty open and pretty candid about what they said. They said that Willem Dafoe had a pretty significant appearance fee. And in exchange for part of that appearance fee, that the con itself would shoulder a decent chunk of the appearance fee in exchange for using Willem Dafoe's face on their advertising materials, using his face on the badge to get in, using his face on the website to promote tickets. Because he's such a headliner, he wanted that it wasn't just his agency bringing him in, that he wanted an upfront amount of money from Wizard uh, to cover his costs. And Wizard had promised that they would pay. I don't remember the exact figure, that the percentage that they had agreed to pay, but they had agreed to pay a percentage of what his booking fee was, and in exchange for this. And they just, and when the deadline came due for it, they didn't pay it. And they kept making excuses like, "Oh, we didn't sell enough tickets yet. Will we sell more tickets? We'll have more money, and then we'll be able to pay." And at some point, he just bailed and said, "Nope," because now he can't trust that they would actually shoulder their end of the bargain.
Yeah.
And it's funny because for a few weeks they left his name and picture up anyway. So he was actually canceled well before they announced it publicly, but they wanted to just sell more tickets. Using his face.
That's just completely just shameless.
Right, but I mean, I'm not, number one. I'm not surprised that Wizard was the
not
one
at
doing
all
this.
either.
And secondly, though, this is the reality of the model that they have with these appearances. That a promoter, in some ways, this is going to sound weird, but there's an economic incentive for a promoter to behave that way, because they know they can get away with it. They can throw his face up there, sell some tickets. If he sues, which is not going to do because it's not worth the money, they can say, well, they made a good faith attempt to pay, but they couldn't come up with the money, and there's really no damages, so that there wouldn't be any outcome there. And so all it means is that they got to sell some free tickets using someone else's face. Not a bad deal for Wizard.
No, I mean it's all well and good if you're a con promoter that doesn't really care about their reputation, and we see how far that got Wizard. Not to say that this one thing is what put them under, but adding together all these different, this and different stories, and like you said, that they really never did business the right way. It's not surprising that they went from major con around the country to just, afterthought and memory. They're gone.
What's funny is though that, 'cause we always there's always these debates on the, the various groups, and there used to be debates on the board. There are certain promoters that people will say, I would never give that promoter any money, and then a lot of us would joke and they say, listen, if the guest is there and it's a guest you want to meet, you're going to pay him. It doesn't matter who you're paying, you
Yeah,
know. And we've seen instances of that where promoters have negative reputations, or a promoter screwed someone over once before, so people don't want to give them any more money. But if they bring in a guest and you can't get the guest anywhere else and you really want them, you're going to pay, right? And so
exactly.
that's, yeah. And so Wizard engaged in some really really bad business practices, and I think what ended up happening was it became harder for them to book guests without paying them up front. And then, as we talked about last week, once you're committing to paying guests up front, you better sell enough tickets to make your money back, or else you're not going to last.
Exactly.
And I mean, these cons already. Let's be honest. And this is something I would love to pose these questions to convention promoters when we eventually talk to them. But most of these conventions, dare I say, all of these conventions, rely on unpaid labor to get them to run. They're all volunteer run,
Oh
which
yeah,
is
volunteers.
that kills me,
Yeah,
because these promoters make a living. This is their full, for many of them it's their full-time job, it's their profession, promoting these cons, and yet the labor they use is volunteer, which is another serious, in my opinion, I don't know what you're feeling, it's a serious ethical problem when you're engaged in a profit-making endeavor and you're relying on labor that's volunteer.
yeah. I mean, let's be clear, the volunteers are extremely eager. To them, their pay is just being within elbow rubbing distance of their heroes and the people that they, look up to or whatever. To them, it's amazing. It's an amazing opportunity. But like when you think of it the way you just said, which is true, this is the convention promoter's livelihood. They are making a living from this thing, and then you just have volunteers, which, I mean, bless their hearts, a lot of them try to, their hardest to do and, be as present and do as good of a job as possible. But oftentimes, I think you'll agree with me, the training just isn't there. A lot of them are completely unprepared to handle the line and the situation in front of them. That's what you get. You get what you pay for as far as help.
Oh man, I feel up feeling so bad for these. Talk about a tangent, but I feel so bad for a lot of these volunteers. You see people screaming at them. Inevitably, some of these cons, because they were using volunteers or because they're disorganized, there are lines that are all over the place, and chaos ensues. And then the poor schlub who's volunteering, thinking they're doing it to rub elbows with the stars, but their job is actually managing lines outside.
Oh yeah.
Total torture. No one wants to do that job, and they're getting screamed at by patrons, sometimes justifiably so, because we've seen disorganization that ends up costing people money, and costing people opportunities. And it's always funny to me. I know it shouldn't be funny, but it's always funny when
Yeah.
I see these volunteers, and it's like, oh my god. I remember at New York Comic Con had they used to be all volunteer, and now there's an interesting thing, like the base level volunteers have one color shirt, but then like the paid employees have a different color shirt, and so you always, like, you're trying, the volunteers just get abused beyond belief. I'll stand. I don't care who. I would love for someone to disagree with me on that. The level of abuse hurled at volunteers is just, it's uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
But anyway, we were talking about cancellations. I don't know how we deviated there. Another big one. Uh, so Willem Dafoe was a big one that canceled because he was not paid in his fee in advance. And that was a very specific deal because of the advertising. But I mean, one of the reasons why Walker Stalker / Heroes and Villains cons completely went under was because they were this is remarkable. They were relying on handshake agreements with celebrities who they had previous agreements with. So it's like anything else. The first time you deal with somebody, they want their money in advance. The
Yeah.
20th time you deal with somebody, it's less important because you're dealing with them all the time. And so they were, the con was collecting money for autographs and collecting money for for the celebrities and for photo ops and everything. And then when it came time to pay out, they just didn't. And so there were a few times where these Walker Stalker cons or these Heroes and Villains cons were happening in 2018 and 2019, where fans are paying money. They're paying money to the con. They were using their credit cards to buy, and then the actual payout at the end of the weekend was not actually going to the celebrity. And then so there was a pretty high profile instance, and I think it was 2019, where a
Yeah.
bunch of the cast of Walking Dead posted on Twitter they had not been paid for at least one con, and they would no longer attend Heroes and Villains cons, and that was the end of Heroes and Villains, because you gotta pay your people, and that's why so many cons just do the cash only model.
Yeah.
You
But I
know, I
mean,
mean, go ahead.
it's kind of a problem when you make your entire brand, you like literally title your con Walker Stalker, and then you take all the Walker cast, the Walking Dead people, and just screw them over. And then, what are you going to do with a Walker Stalker con if you don't have Walking Dead cast willing to attend?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting how the different, because a lot of people think these cons, they all run the same in terms of business wise, and they all have the same business model, but it's really not true. There are some differences. So, for example, there are some cons that operate on a cash only model. So, as a general rule, now I'm not speaking 100% of the time, but as a general rule, if a con is operating under a cash only rule, then there's a good chance that the 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 talent is all being paid directly at the table. In other words, you're paying the talent makes what the talent makes at the table in cash on that weekend or whatever. If you're able to buy certain autographs with a credit card online, then there's usually, but not always, some degree of revenue sharing between the con itself and the talent. Now, that's not 100% of the time true, but that's a pretty good kind of rule of thumb. So you see, if, for example, a con like, I'll just throw Steel City since we've been talking about it, most guests on Steel City, or most guests who go to Steel City, can be pre-ordered in advance, and so likely that a lot of those people are working on from guaranteed money. Whereas if you go to a con like, say, Chiller Theater, for example, um, those people, they're only cash at the table, and so those people, most of them are not guaranteed money. Now, of course, there are exceptions, and that I'm painting with a very very broad brush. Um, but that'll give you a little bit of insight sometimes into the cancellation, some of the reasons. So, for example, we went to Contropolis in New Jersey this past weekend. Just for reference, today is my birthday. It's July 16th, and so what day we go to Contropolis? Saturday, right?
Yeah, Saturday.
What day was that? The 13th. I don't know. So we'll tie it up to cancellations in a sec. What was your experience with Contropolis?
Well, I mean, my experience with Contropolis was really the same as my experience at Contropolis last year. It's fairly local. I mean, we live on Long Island, as we said in episode 1, and for people that know us, so for us, we pretty much we're crossing water with most cons. We got bridges, we have tunnels, we have things we have to go through. So I mean, convenient is a stretch, but from Long Island where we are to Secaucus, that's it's under 2 hours, which is about as good as it gets. Contropolis always has names that we need. When you get in the building, there's not a ton of people. You make it through security relatively quick. Tables are never too crowded. If you just look at it as a fan, it's a great con. But as we're about to get into, when you start looking at it deeper than that, it makes you a little concerned about the future well-being, maybe.
Oh man, I mean, you're being much more diplomatic than I'm about to be. So just for reference, Contropolis. They run a couple shows. There's one in New Jersey, and where's the other one? There's another one, another Contropolis. Do you know?
I can look it up
Massachusetts
while
or
you're.
Connecticut? Yeah, look it up.
Yeah.
There's another Contropolis. It's the same name. There's one in New Jersey and one elsewhere. The Contropolis is run by Altered
Oh,
Reality.
Contropolis, Pennsylvania. They run the Oaks.
There you go, Contropolis, Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Contropolis is run by Altered Reality Entertainment, which is the same company that runs a very, very, very large con in Rhode Island Comic Con. And Rhode Island Comic Con has been one of our favorite shows to go to for years. It's a huge con. It's run in an arena. I don't remember the name of the arena. I think it's changed a bunch of times.
It used to be the Dunk. It was Dunkin' Donuts Center, and
Yeah,
now it's
some bank or something, and some insurance company.
Some corporate title. I don't know.
Yeah, it's some bank or insurance company because every stadium is owned by a bank or insurance. But anyway, I digress. Anyway, Alter Reality runs Rhode Island Comic Con. They also run the Contropolis shows. And so last year was our first. I think it was my first Control. Maybe 1 year ago. I don't remember, but it was the first I remember. And I remember going in there last year and saying to you, "There's no freaking way we go back. We attend Contropolis 2024 because there were no fans.
Yeah,
there were no lines. You could basically walk up to any table with no line, and it wasn't like they booked inexpensive around the horn convention guests. They kind of booked pretty big names. I'm not I wouldn't say no huge headliner names like New York Comic Con or even like Rhode Island does, but they booked some very, very, very solid B names. At these shows. Yeah, I mean, and I've been to shows personally. I know we've been to shows that booked worse quality names and had way better attendance.
Yeah,
I guess that's safe to say. And so last year, we both made the comment on the way home: "There's no way this con runs again because it was a ghost town." And again, it really depends on the structure of how people are paid. But for a con like that, the truth of the matter is, if the promoter isn't making money running it, and the guests aren't making money at the table, either the promoter took a bath by paying guests guaranteed money, or the other side, the guests all sat there and came in and made no money all weekend and weren't paid guaranteed money. So either A, the guests wouldn't be willing to come back, or B, the con promoters wouldn't want to lose their shirts a second year in a row.
Yeah.
But I digress. So this year, we see the Contropolis guest list for New Jersey. And again, no serious top tier names, but some honestly pretty good ones and some names that haven't been, around the tri-state area too often. They had a bunch of the Starship Troopers people, Casper Van Dien and Michael Ironside and Dina Meyer, and these are people who, Dina Meyer was in Saw, and Michael Ironside's like Total Recall. These are name actors, They had a bunch of Rick and Morty people advertised. They had Chris Parnell, who plays Jerry, the dad. They had advertised Spencer Grammer, who plays Summer, the daughter. They had Harry Belden, who's the Justin Roiland replacement for Morty. Who else did they have? They had a couple of people who had historically only done super expensive creation cons because they were members of the Twilight cast. Kellen Lutz and Peter Facinelli, who always drew very well for creation cons.
They had the Nightmare Before Christmas crew, including Ken Page, who could have very easily been on our cancellation list. He cancels everywhere.
Ken Page cancels constantly. I know, but the two of them, right? Chris Sarandon and Ken Page were there. It was a very, very Kevin Sorbo was advertised. Dante Bosco from Avatar was advertised. It was a pretty damn good advertised list. So these people normally draw very well at cons, and all of a sudden, within the last week or so of the con, a bunch of names started dropping off. So Spencer Grammer dropped off. Kevin Sorbo dropped off. And there were one or two. Dante Bosco had dropped off, I think, the week before. um, all these names were dropping off, and it's like you're wondering what the hell's going on. Um, there are cons that have almost no cancellations, and this con had 10. The final number was 10 cancellations, and so you gotta that's an unusually high number for a show of that size. Big shows, big name shows that have New York Comic Con that has hundreds of guests, literally hundreds of guests advertised. To have a dozen or 2 dozen cancellations makes sense. That's just the law of averages and odds. But for a show that only has 40 or so guests, to have 10 drop off, you're talking about a quarter of the
Yeah, I'm
roster.
saying, like, I'm no math teacher, but that's a pretty high percentage of cancellations for
And so
how
you
many.
gotta, yeah, it was so I was pretty pissed, honestly, because despite the fact that I know how these things work, that doesn't stop me from getting pissed about how they work.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So I had bought some stuff because I wanted to meet Spencer Grammer. I had bought some stuff because I wanted to meet Kevin Sorbo, Hercules, and of course they both canceled, and I got super pissed. And so we were kicking around some ideas as to why would this show have so many cancellations. And well, we kind of learned, and which is pretty much what we had suspected, was that we got there, because we knew about the cancellations in advance. Nobody no showed. And Dana, do you want to describe what it was like when we were walking up to the building?
We were coming from like one of the parking garages, and as we walked up on the exposition center over there, I looked at Sean, and my first thought was, did we come up the wrong weekend? Like, there was no one outside, no one outside, and at this point it was like a rainy day, but it wasn't raining at this point. So, well, like, once we went up the stairs, we saw that the very small line was contained in the lobby. And if you know that building, you know that's not a very large lobby. So that tells you, and this was maybe what, 35 minutes before doors.
I think
So
it was less than that. It was like 20 minutes before
yeah,
doors.
so
But what's funny is, and just to be clear, you were not being ironic. You were not being like sarcastic, being a jerk. You were not like, oh, the wrong weekend. You genuinely asked me if we came on the wrong day
yeah, that's
because there was
always
still.
that's always one of the fears. That's one of those, like, at least I always like double, triple check the dates, because like, imagine you make like some huge trip and you get there and like the building's empty and you're wrong. Like, that would just be like you'd want to just drive your car off the bridge at that point on your way home.
That's like one of those dreams of waking. You're dreaming you go into high school with your underwear, only
Yeah.
your underwear, no pants on. It's the same thing. You go to a con on the wrong day. Um, that's actually really funny because many, many years ago, when I was a junior in college, I actually I looked up the date that a class ended when the final paper was due, and I got it wrong on the syllabus, and it was a week earlier than I thought. And so I show up on the last day with my paper, and there was no one in the room. The class had ended the week before, and I hadn't gone to that class at all that semester. It was terrible. It was really one of those things that it was like one of those nightmares that comes to life. But yeah, it was so poorly attended that it was actually alarming. I'm gonna come out and say it was actually alarming that there was no one there. And
Yeah.
so you walk in the door, and I looked at it, and I'm like, no, the con ended. It opened at 10, and I said, "There's no way we're even here after noon. There's no way. We'll be out of here so fast." And we were basically, we walked up to, most of the guests were there at 10, which is unusual. Some of these shows, the guests don't come down until 11 because they want a little bit of a line to build up. It's like a psychological thing.
Yeah.
We should probably devote an episode just to that, the insane psychology of these stupid con things where like some of these guests get all bent out of shape if there's no line in front of them. It's like that blow to their ego.
Oh yeah.
Though it's funny, the ones who are like seasoned con pros, they know how to just deal with it, and they figure out other things to do. Or the real good ones know how to drum up business for themselves by interacting with people. But some of them get all like get all hurt feelings when they don't have a line. But anyway, these were all a lot of seasoned con pros. I mean, like, you got guys like Casper Van Dien, who's a total pro. and people like that who just they know how to do it. They know how to work a line. They're experts. So they're
Yeah,
there at 10, and it was crazy because there was no one there. And so it was interesting because you ended up after the con was over, a couple days later, you actually had a conversation with one of the guests who was at the con about how much business they did.
yeah. I'm not going to divulge names, but I was speaking with a convention guest who I've seen around quite a bit, and of course, the first question I asked him was, how was Contropolis? And he mentioned what what we saw. He saw as a seasoned pro, crowds weren't there, and his unofficial but official answer to how it went was, I can't imagine anyone there made any money. And I went back and forth as we were doing right now, like, why would a show like this? I was saying, like, Secaucus is pretty much a convention hotbed. Like, the lineup was pretty solid. Like, why doesn't this show draw? Why do people still go to this show? And his official answer basically was, if you want to go to Providence, which is the Rhode Island Comic Con, where you make serious money, you kind of pay your dues and take your licks, and you make the Contropolis date, because that's going to help the vendor, not the vendor, the con promoter. That's going to get your foot in the door for Providence.
So it's funny because it's almost like a little bit of hazing
Yeah,
for these guys. They have to be willing to show up and be on time and not cancel, because I mean, it seems like most of these people have to know based on. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I don't think they sold 500 tickets to fans the whole weekend.
I
That's
can't. I mean,
right.
unless half of them stayed home, I can't imagine they did. Yeah,
At any given time, there when we were there, so we were there, peak cons typically the around the time of the open, that's when a lot of the people were there. So we were there from 10 to 12. There couldn't have been more than 200 people in the building. It
no,
was scary how empty it actually was. There was not a single line. We waited the longest line that I waited in was to take a selfie with Peter Facinelli from Can't Hardly Wait, Mike Dexter. Anyway, and there were like 4 people in front of me. That's it. But the reason why it took so long was this girl was giving her life story for 10 years.
and then
Which
someone
is
else had to, another fan behind her then had to continually re-shift in their prom pose for the photo op. So
oh my god,
that takes
the
at least 10 minutes.
the prom poses that again, that's a conversation for another day, I think. But yeah, poor Peter Facinelli. It's funny because he and Kellen Lutz come from the creation cons, and I think we should actually, we hadn't talked about this. We should probably do a show on creation cons.
Oh,
Um,
100%. The way
uh,
yeah.
So creation is very different from the other cons. I mean, they're offering roughly the same product, but they exist outside the ecosystem of the traditional cons. So when you look at the traditional con circuit, your major cons such as New York Comic Con, Dragon Con in Atlanta, San Diego Comic Con out in San Diego, those are like your main event, your top of the line cons. Then your tier 2 cons would be like Steel City in Pittsburgh, Rhode Island Comic Con in Providence, your various fan expos, which is like 100 of them all over the country. That's like tier 2. And then the tier below that would be things like Chiller Theater, Monster Mania Con, Fright, Texas Frightmare, those kind of ones, who are in the tier below. And then the tier below would be like Contropolis. And so creation does not really exist in that same ecosystem. What they would do was they had properties, licenses. So creation would have like the Star Trek, the official Star Trek con. Did you went to creation cons, right?
I did. I'll get into the deep stories when we do the full episode,
Yeah,
because this would take this episode and
the
all of
whole
it.
thing. Yeah.
Like, it's a whole situation and a whole environment that's unlike any other.
So creation, whereas most of the other cons target mixed gendered uh, audiences, or often heavily male audiences, if being honest, um, creation audiences skew heavily towards women, and they would book properties like Supernatural, Twilight, Teen Wolf, those kind of things, and they would tour with the same cast members from those shows all over the country. And so the Twilight people or the Teen Wolf people, they would only do creation cons, and they would be signed to exclusive deals. So they would only do those cons, and they would only um, be part of that circuit. And so and basically they would keep running those cons for those properties until the demand ran out, and then they would go on to new properties. So, making a very long story short, Kellen Lutz and Peter Facinelli were from Twilight, so they were on the Twilight circuit for creation. So, which pretty much that means they pretty much didn't do any other cons. Uh, Very few, because they kind of forced into exclusivity. And so the creation people, they when they do photos, a lot of times it's these very very I'm gonna be very charitable here. They are very very enthusiastic women fans of these properties who will often pay for multiple photo ops with the same person, and then take pictures with them as if they were taking like wedding photos or prom photos. Would you say that's a fair characterization?
A generous but fair, yes, very kind. I would have had some different adjectives, but it's pretty much that. Yes.
In any case, I was waiting in line behind this young lady who took a half dozen at least prom photos with Peter Facinelli, and we were joking that she certainly came. She was definitely from the creation crew, because that's how that it's the kind of practice that it does not happen at a New York Comic Con, or at a Steel City Con or something, but you'll see it at creation cons, and we saw it at Contropolis. But I digress. It's just funny that in any case, my longest line was 5 people, and it really was not a line at all. It was just kind of inconsiderate behavior by other fans, which really didn't mean anything.
And just to tie a bow on Contropolis, when I was speaking with the guest who was talking about how poorly attended the show was, he said that the only person he saw with actual lines the entire weekend, including himself, was Jesse Flower from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
And that
We
tracks because she never does shows, so it's
Yes,
very rare.
pretty rare. Because we were there for only an hour, so like maybe you could say, well, everyone filed in after we left. It could be the one con that defies all laws of physics and nature, but no, the guest confirmed it never got better. And aside from Jesse Flower, no one did well. And honestly, if Jesse Flower had a line there, she would have done gangbusters business at an RICC or a New York Comic Con or an actual show with people.
What's funny is, I think, you know, to tie it back to the concept of cancellations, we were joking, and okay, we don't know for sure, and we can't speak with certainty on this because we weren't there. In the we haven't read the emails and stuff, but in all likelihood, there's a fairly strong chance that not all, but a decent chunk of these people who canceled the show canceled because they knew they weren't going to make any money.
Yeah, I think there's definitely part of that at play here.
One of the it's funny because a con promoter, one of their responsibilities is to make sure there are butts in the building. There have to be people there to spend money at the table. And if you're a guest, or you're a vendor and you spent money to be there, the expectation is that they will have promoted that show and get people in the door.
Yeah, you can't leave the talent hanging like that. Like they can only do so much. Their followers, they have a lot of followers in many cases, but they're worldwide. Like you have to, as the convention promoter, you have to hit that region hard and be able to guarantee that you're going to get these people in the door.
It's really interesting because there really is, like, whose responsibility is it to draw? Is it the organization? Is it the talent? For shows like New York Comic Con. New York Comic Con sells out of its tickets before they announce their first guest. You know,
Yeah.
uh, but at the same time, they have a reputation for bringing in and having a whole product that's very exciting. Some of these shows are selling discounted tickets on Groupon because they don't have the reputation. So there is a question of chicken and the egg, whose responsibility, who comes first. Is it the talent who draws? Is it the promotion that draws? In reality, it's probably a connection between those two things, and that's where it gets complicated. That's probably why, even with a good lineup and even with a company with a decent amount of money backing the con, Contropolis, New Jersey was largely a dud. Although I had a great time. I mean, Chris Parnell was awesome. It was a lot of fun. Facinelli was fun. So the guests were cool. It's just it's scary when there's no one in the building.
Yeah, I selfishly and for the good of the the talent, I hope there's another one because I always enjoy the show. Like Sean said, talent was fun. It was a good time, but you have to look at the whole picture, and it's a little concerning.
So I think that's gonna wrap us up for the third episode. It's my understanding that we will have a guest next week, so you're gonna have to turn in. Hopefully, so I'm not gonna make any promises, but that's what we tentatively have a guest for next week. So hopefully that comes through. We're not
Yeah,
gonna say who.
much
Um,
like the much like conventions that we were talking about. I mean, it's all subject to scheduling. We're
it
trying.
look,
Okay.
Yeah, the card is definitely subject to change. I mean, Dana, just as long as you don't pull a bushwhacker butch on me next week. Is
Oh
that
yes,
too?
we definitely couldn't finish the cancellation episode without talking about, not to be insensitive, but like the ultimate cancellation. And Sean, maybe you and I are just cold, heartless ghouls that are only concerned with like our own like needs at these cons. But I know we've always had the running joke that like what if the guest like just dies like the night before, right at the table when you're like the next online to get up there. We would always make a joke about marked out legend class 316 trying to like force validity, and if with the freshly deceased con guest. And that's like one of the big things. The bushwhacker Luke is old hat. He's in the States a lot more often. He does a lot, he's all over the place. But Butch was one of those that canceled, not a ton because he wasn't really even booked that many times, but he canceled a few times. He was still in New Zealand. It was a huge ordeal to make the trip. Finally, I believe it was last WrestleMania, he made the trip, and friends of the show, Marcus and Lucas, actually had a private signing with him the night before WrestleCon, and they were the last fans that were actually able to meet and get like the group photo op and get the stuff signed and actually be in Bushwhacker Butch's presence, because that night, or between that night and the next morning, he passed away, and obviously he didn't make the show.
It has happened a few times, and with wrestlers mostly, but other actors too. I remember Ernie Ladd had passed away shortly before a wrestling con that he was booked for. I know that there were other ones too. I can't think of one of the one of the actresses from Willy Wonka. I think she died shortly before booking. But
Yeah,
then it's a thing. Of course, it's sort of the saddest form of cancellation,
yeah,
the guest cancellation. But it's one of those things that I think the message here, the takeaway is, if there's a guest that's booked who you want to meet, go, because they may go on a no show run.
yeah.
Or they may start canceling, or they may get sick, or they might die, or they might stop doing them. There are plenty of people who used to do cons all the time and who don't do them anymore. Or the con mainstays are becoming fewer and fewer out there.
And even on like an investment level, like and not to go on a deeper tangent since we're wrapping up, but Kevin Conroy was a guy who was at every convention, one of the nicest guys ever. got sick, still was doing conventions while, battling and dealing with all that. And, his stuff, the value of his stuff is sky high still. Like,
It's
it's,
funny. We thought, not funny, but it's interesting because we thought that his stuff would come down to earth after a year, and it hasn't. It's super high.
yeah.
So it's interesting. But so the takeaway is, you can never assure the guests are going to make their bookings. I wish it was that we lived in a simple world where once people agreed to make a booking, they would make that booking. But there's a variety of reasons why they can get those plans can get derailed. So I just want to once again go over our upcoming signings and things. Once again, if you are shopping for autographs, check out markedoutcollectibles.com. You can check out our eBay store at marked-out-collectibles, or our sister eBay store at ny-collectibles. If you want to contact us for any reason, you can visit or email, markedoutcollectibles@gmail.com. Also, if you want to interact, you can find us in the Marked Out Collectibles Facebook group or on markedout.com. The old forum is still up and active. A couple of signings coming up. We have Melissa Barrera from Scream 5 and 6. All items and orders are due August 1st. We have Joe Hendry, TNA, NXT. He's kind of a big deal now. The next big thing, I think.
And not to cut you off, but speaking of don't wait, there's not going to be many Joe Hendry signings. I'm telling you right now, this guy will be in WWE. If you don't want to meet him at Fanatics Fest in the future, get your orders in. He is not going to be available for bookings very long.
I joked to you the other day. I hope he makes this one.
Yeah,
because it looks like his signing with WWE is inevitable.
Yeah,
or frankly may have happened already. And finally, Paul Heyman. The website link is fixed. So if you want to do an order for Paul Heyman, all send-ins and orders are due November 7th.
And that is yet another one where I would say do not wait. This guy, and Sean can attest to this, we've been in this game as collectors and as vendors for a long time, respectively, and he does not do appearances. Don't wait for next time. If you're in the area, by all means, go to the big event and meet him in person. If you're not in the area, send in, buy some options that we have. He is no guarantee to do another.
It's true. A lot of these guys are one and done. So, all right, I think that wraps it up. We'll hopefully lock down our guest appearance for next week, and hopefully I will survive. I survived it to 44. We'll see if I survive another week.
Let's hope.
I know, right? So anyway, that took a dark turn for a sec, but I digress. And so for Marked Out Collectibles and markedout.com, I'm Sean.
And I'm Dana.
And we'll see you next week.